The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. The high-profile case of State versus Thompson had drawn media attention from across the country. At the center of it all was Marcus Thompson, a young black man accused of embezzling millions from a prestigious investment firm. The prosecution painted him as a greedy, opportunistic criminal, but Marcus maintained his innocence. He claimed he was set up by his former boss, a powerful white executive named Richard Grayson, who had a history of shady dealings. The judge presiding over the case was Judge Harold Whitaker, a man in his late 50s with a reputation for being harsh, dismissive, and, some would say, biased. He had a habit of cutting off defense attorneys mid-argument, especially if they were young or, as many had noticed, if they were black. Enter Jordan Carter, Marcus's defense attorney. Jordan was a 32-year-old black man, sharp, confident, and impeccably dressed. He had a reputation for taking on tough cases and winning, but Judge Whitaker had never seen him in action. When Jordan walked into the courtroom, Whitaker barely glanced up from his papers. To the judge, Jordan was just another young lawyer trying to make a name for himself. The trial began, and Jordan stood to deliver his opening statement. He spoke with clarity and conviction, outlining the flaws in the prosecution's case and pointing out the lack of concrete evidence against Marcus. But before he could finish, Judge Whitaker interrupted. "Counselor," Whitaker said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "are you done with your little speech? Because we have a trial to get through, and I don't have time for theatrics." The courtroom chuckled, and Jordan felt the heat rise in his cheeks. He took a deep breath, maintaining his composure. "Your Honor, I'm simply laying out the facts of the case. My client is innocent, and I intend to prove it." Whitaker rolled his eyes. "Innocent, huh? We'll see about that. Proceed, but keep it brief. I don't have all day." The tension in the room was palpable. Marcus, sitting at the defense table, looked nervous. He leaned over to Jordan and whispered, "You got this, right?" Jordan gave him a reassuring nod. "I've got this." The prosecution called their first witness, Richard Grayson, Marcus's former boss. Grayson was a tall, imposing man with a polished demeanor. He took the stand and confidently testified that Marcus had access to the company's financial records and had siphoned off millions over the course of a year. Jordan knew Grayson was lying. He had spent months investigating the case and had uncovered evidence that Grayson himself had orchestrated the embezzlement scheme, framing Marcus to cover his tracks. But Jordan needed to tread carefully. Judge Whitaker had already made it clear he wasn't interested in theatrics. When it was Jordan's turn to cross-examine Grayson, he stood and approached the witness stand. "Mr. Grayson," he began, "you testified that Marcus had access to." Jordan knew Grayson was lying. He had spent months investigating the case and had uncovered evidence that Grayson himself had orchestrated the embezzlement scheme, framing Marcus to cover his tracks. But Jordan needed to tread carefully. Judge Whitaker had already made it clear he wasn't interested in theatrics. When it was Jordan's turn to cross-examine Grayson, he stood and approached the witness stand. "Mr. Grayson," he began, "you testified that Marcus had access to the financial records. Is that correct?" "Yes," Grayson replied smugly. "And you also testified that Marcus was the only one with access to those records. Is that also correct?" Grayson hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes." Jordan paused, letting the answer hang in the air. He knew Grayson was lying. He had evidence that multiple employees, including Grayson himself, had access to the records. But before Jordan could press further, Judge Whitaker interrupted. "Counselor," Whitaker said, his tone dripping with condescension, "are you going somewhere with this, or are you just wasting the court's time?" Jordan clenched his fists but kept his voice steady. "Your Honor, I'm establishing the facts of the case. If you'll allow me to continue." Whitaker cut him off. "Move it along, Counselor. We don't need a lecture." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Jordan could feel the weight of the judge's bias pressing down on him, but he refused to back down. He continued his cross-examination, but Whitaker's interruptions made it nearly impossible to make progress. As the trial progressed, Jordan's frustration grew. Every time he tried to present evidence or challenge the prosecution's case, Judge Whitaker shut him down. It was clear that Whitaker had already made up his mind about Marcus's guilt, and he wasn't interested in hearing anything that contradicted his assumptions. The breaking point came during Jordan's cross-examination of a forensic accountant who had testified for the prosecution. Jordan had uncovered discrepancies in the accountant's report, but when he tried to bring them up, Whitaker cut him off. "Counselor," Whitaker said, his voice laced with sarcasm, "do you even know what you're talking about? This is a complex financial case, not some TV drama. Maybe you should stick to something more your speed." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Jordan felt a surge of anger, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew he had to play the long game. "Your Honor," Jordan said, his voice steady, "I assure you, I know exactly what I'm talking about. If you'll allow me to proceed." Whitaker slammed his gavel. "Enough. I've heard enough from you, counselor. Sit down." Jordan had no choice but to comply. As he returned to his seat, he could feel the eyes of the courtroom on him. The judge's disrespect was humiliating, but Jordan refused to let it break him. That night, Jordan sat in his office, poring over the case files. He knew he had to do something drastic. The trial was slipping away, and Marcus's future was on the line. Then, he remembered something, a piece of information he had uncovered during his investigation but hadn't yet used. The next morning, Jordan arrived in court with a renewed sense of purpose. As the trial resumed, he requested a private meeting with Judge Whitaker in his chambers. Whitaker, intrigued and slightly annoyed, agreed. In the judge's chambers, Jordan wasted no time. "Your Honor," he began, "I have evidence that Richard Grayson, the prosecution's star witness, has a history of financial fraud. I also have proof that he framed my client to cover his own tracks." Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "And why should I believe you? You've done nothing but waste this court's time since the trial began." Jordan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. He handed it to Whitaker. "This is a report from the Securities and Exchange Commission. It details Grayson's involvement in multiple fraudulent schemes. I also have bank records showing that he transferred millions of dollars into offshore accounts around the same time the embezzlement allegedly occurred." Whitaker flipped through the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. Finally, he looked up at Jordan. "Why didn't you present this earlier?" Jordan met his gaze. "Because, Your Honor, I knew you wouldn't take me seriously. You've made it clear from the start that you don't respect me or my client. But now you have the evidence. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitaker called for a recess. When the trial resumed, the atmosphere was tense. Whitaker addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, new evidence has come to light that significantly impacts this case. I have reviewed the evidence presented by the defense, and it is clear that there are serious questions about the credibility of the prosecution's case." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Richard Grayson, sitting in the witness stand, looked pale. Jordan stood, ready to deliver the final blow. "Your Honor," Jordan said, "I move to dismiss all charges against my client. The evidence shows that Marcus Thompson is innocent and that Richard Grayson is the true culprit." Whitaker hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Motion granted. The charges against Marcus Thompson are dismissed. Mr. Grayson, you are under arrest." The courtroom exploded in chaos. Marcus hugged Jordan, tears streaming down his face. Grayson was led away in handcuffs, his smug demeanor replaced with sheer panic. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Whitaker approached Jordan. "Counselor," he said, his tone uncharacteristically respectful, "I owe you an apology. I underestimated you, and I was wrong. Jordan nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. But this isn't just about me. It's about every person who walks into this courtroom expecting justice. They deserve to be heard, no matter who they are or where they come from." Whitaker looked down, clearly chastened. "You're right. I'll remember that." As Jordan left the courtroom, he felt a sense of satisfaction. Justice had been served, not just for Marcus, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or mistreated. The underdog had won, and the powerful had been humbled. The story of Jordan Carter and Marcus Thompson is a powerful reminder that justice is not always easy, but it is always worth fighting for. No matter how stacked the deck may seem, the truth has a way of coming to light. And when it does, it can change everything. Let us know in the comments, have you ever been underestimated or mistreated? How did you overcome it? Share your story and inspire others to stand up for what's right. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and triumph. Together, we can make a difference.